Participants in our study discussed the importance of a substantial scholarly research base for middle school education. They cited both progress and limitations in the current research base. Middle school education is a relatively new field, and as Joan Lipsitz reminded us, young adolescence was a non-field less than 4 decades ago. On the side of progress, Erb, McEwin, Sue Swaim, and others observe that there is a growing body of research related to middle school education and young adolescents. Bergman discussed this development.
There's more research right now available to us as to what works and what doesn't. I mean, there's just a ton of research out there about kids. Maybe not necessarily called middle school research, but we know so much about adolescents and young adolescents now that we didn't know even 10 years ago. The early puberty research, the gender research, the allergy research, the nutrition research, the sex ed, drug, alcohol, you name it, social issues research is all there. So by identifying this age group as different, what we've done is been able to start new research projects that have to do with these kids.
Erb and McEwin asserted that the research has shown that implementing middle school practices makes a positive difference for young adolescents. Arnold discussed that middle school teachers have benefited from a growing body of descriptive data about what good middle school teaching looks like. Another area of progress related to research in middle school education has been its water cooler effect.
Now that middle school education and young adolescents have become legitimate areas of research, more individuals and groups are talking about them. People involved in medicine, psychology, sociology, education, and other fields focus their studies on the issues of young adolescents. Then these individuals and groups can read each other's work, meet at conferences, collaborate on research, and continue building the research base.
Bergman and Dickinson discussed the importance of this development. Bergman, for example, discussed how the medical community began researching issues of young adolescent health and development.
A big moment for me was when people began to question what athletics ought to be involved for middle school kids, and pediatricians like Lee Salk began doing research on young adolescents and their development, and the American Academy of Pediatrics made some statements about what was and wasn't good for kids athletically in the middle school. So we saw a big difference then in no-cut sports. We saw a removal of some of the more dangerous sports for middle school kids, waiting until their bodies were ready. And I think that for me, personally, that was a really big moment when we drew in the medical profession to say, we need to do research on this age group. And we saw, particularly at Johns Hopkins, an amazing amount of increase in middle school research on child development. And people began saying, what do we know about this age group? What do we need to know? And they began doing the early puberty research, and they began doing the anorexia and all of the social bodily things, looking at what does harm to these kids. So that was a focus. That was a turning point.
Dickinson discussed the involvement and influence of researchers in fields like psychology and in organizations and foundations.
There's a whole thread of psychological research. Jeannie Brooks Gunn is one that comes to mind. Jacqueline Eccles comes to mind, who have never been part of the, quote, middle school movement, but who have done tremendous amounts of research outside of the mainstream educators. And yet their work is really what we base all of our work on. The psychologists and the researchers have been primary in giving us a knowledge base to stand on. And then there are the, quote, others. And you have to look to places like the Center for Early Adolescence with Joan. You have to look at the different foundations. Carnegie, early on Ford, and even recently Pew Charitable Trust and others, which were really repositories of a lot of very thoughtful, creative people who supported a lot in what went on in middle grades, but who weren't really involved in the middle school. There are some parallel tracks out there, and only every now and then when you have a group like now, the Forum to Accelerate Middle Grades Change, do you see the crossover and broad participation. Early on, there were a lot of parallel tracks, but they didn't mix. And that was to our detriment.
Dickinson's comments provide both a celebration of the progress that has been made in reaching across disciplinary lines to consider, influence, share, and act on the research of others, as well as a challenge to do more to collaborate with individuals and groups whose research and professional advocacy can benefit young adolescents and the professionals who serve them.
While participants acknowledge progress in research, they also express a unanimous belief that more research is needed. Bergman recalled work with schools and districts who wanted more research. She indicated that an early lack of definitive research that middle school concepts make a difference was a barrier to success. She stated that district leaders would say things such as,
"Prove to me that it works. Prove to me that this concept makes any more difference than doing it any other way. Don't give us theory, give us numbers. And we don't want to talk about theory. We want to talk about how it is going to raise our reading and math scores."
Conversely, Tepfer and Erb expressed a belief that research is not necessarily a guarantee of good practice. Erb supplied an example about research related to teaming. Since the enactment of No Child Left Behind and various budgetary cutbacks, we see teaming beginning to disappear. This phenomenon has not occurred because of a change in the middle school concept. On the contrary, we now have a pretty strong research base to support a theoretical basis for interdisciplinary team organization in middle schools. This is a better way to organize the delivery of core curriculum in schools for young adolescents than our separate, uncoordinated classes. Yet we know that many schools are steering away from it.
Though the research about teaming suggests that it is a positive for young adolescents, budget and accountability concerns thwart efforts to implement interdisciplinary teaming. Tepfer raised similar points about the effect of research on American education.
The biggest condemnation of American education is probably has never been research-based. It is whim-based. It is politically based. And we see this movement against the middle school in many parts of the country going on despite the fact, where is the evidence to say that that's a more effective pattern of school organization, that young people will do better being put back into elementary schools and the high schools with only two kinds of program than the success the middle level educational movement has had, and is validated by an awful lot of research.
Tepfer's comments raise an even larger concern about research. Perhaps it does not matter. The challenge is for researchers to develop well-designed and implemented studies about young adolescents, their schools, their teachers, their communities, and other aspects of their healthy development, and to communicate that research far and wide.
Like the middle school philosophy, we cannot limit our advocacy to those within our camp. Rather, we must reach into the public. We must provide accurate research-based information to the media. We must counteract the stereotypes of young adolescents as raging bundles of hormones, and middle schools as merely soft centers of socialization by providing research that demonstrates their value, intellect, and potential.